Ladies and gentlemen, this is Rex, and this is what's the best Warhammer 40k faction/army to start with by the channel Bricky. Yes, this is another Bricky video, one of those Bricky videos, Warhammer videos. I did the every 40k faction one long ago. Not long ago, that was literally the first Warhammer video that I did, I think, a year ago. So that's, after he doesn't make that much Warhammer videos on his main channel, so that was the first one, I think. And then recently I did the Legion one, which was also epic, and he also has this army to start with, and something about what happened in Warhammer tournament or something. But these are Warhammer main videos he has, right? I know he has this secondary channel, Adeptus Ridiculous or whatever, but it's more like a podcast type of channel where two people sit around just talk about things rather than a presentation type of videos that he does with his main channel. So let's watch it.
I must say the support on my prior Warhammer video has been, to put it lightly, absolutely outstanding. I've not had a video perform that well in maybe 3 to 4 years, and it's also a breath of fresh air to be able to make a video on something on a whim, on Warhammer, while very popular game, not a game that I ever really made videos on, and to have it perform as well as it does. YouTube.
His average video is at best gets like around 2 million views. Well, that way every 40k faction video got 6 million views, right? Both of them, right? Other one is also close, like 4 million or something. I don't know. There are 2 videos he made.
And the YouTube world doesn't like change very much, so it is incredibly heartwarming. But with that, it also came with a question that was always being asked to me ever since making that video. Hey Bricky, what army should I play? So for this, my next major Warhammer video, I'm going to answer that question. I'm going to go over all the different kinds of armies, just like we went with the main video, except instead of lore, we're going to be going through the different various ways of collecting the army, as in not only price-wise, but how many models you're going to need, how new or old the model scopes are, and we're going to be going over the play styles of each army respectively. Are they melee? Are they shooting? Are they a little bit of both? Elite armies with only 20 models on the battlefield, or horde armies with 120 models on the battlefield? We're going to be discussing all of those, what each army is about, and give you at least a decent run through of every single faction to allow you to make the conscious and intelligent choice on which army you want to play if you want to get into the tabletop of Warhammer 40,000. But first, before we start, I need to show you something.
Yeah, so I've been, really wanted to see tabletop detail a lot. I love the lore, obviously, but I always wanted to know more detail about how tabletop works, how it is, because there are, Warhammer fans basically who literally takes these tabletop miniatures. They come white or gray or something, and they literally paint it over. Like that's one of their hobbies. They love to do that. I guess Henry Cavill was also talking about that, right? He loves to do that as well. So I really wanted to get into this, Warhammer miniature collection thing, because I really like Warhammer. It's been a long time since I loved any, lore of anything, right? Any universe. So Warhammer is just fucking great. It's dark. It's it's way too big. It branches out in many places. It's always fun.
First things first, there's a thing called Forge World. Forge World is actually a lore thing with the Adeptus Mechanicus. However, what it is actually a partner to Games Workshop. Forge World makes these kind of custom minis that aren't in the codexes specifically. However, you can use them and field them in your games. They're just generally expensive, kind of a little bit weirder. They're a little bit more bizarre, and sometimes like fan-made creations and such. But Forge World is like a side company of Games Workshop that makes 40K. I might mention them a few times. I wanted to go ahead and tell you about that. They're not used a ton, but they are something that you can use. Next, I want to tell you about hitting numbers. So if I ever say something like, oh, this army hits on 3s or 4s or 5s, what I'm saying is if they hit on 3s, that means if you roll a d6 and you throw it out there, if you get a 3, 4, 5, or 6, anything 3 or higher, then you hit your shot. You've landed onto your target. If I say they hit on 4s, it's 4 and up, 5s, 5 and up, etc. And finally, we have things called stratagems. I'm going to mention those a few times. Stratagems are like special abilities you can use after having a pool of command points that you get for building your army, and you can kind of dole those out, these special abilities, stratagems, as you wish. You ever played Command & Conquer, Red Alert 3, or perhaps Kane's Wrath? My personal favorite was always Kane's Wrath. Those little abilities on the side of the map? It's like those. Let's start off with the #1 best army you should collect for a new player. Space Marines. Before we get into tactics, before we get into how they play,
isn't that a radical view? Space Marines. That's the first. Of course, it's Space Marine. Man, this is awesome. I mean, this, I guess, first tabletop game that became very famous was Dungeons and Dragons, right? So I guess there might be some similarities there in how to play, right? But yeah, this, you're supposed to collect all these things and, dice. I mean, dice is normal, right? It's not like Dungeons and Dragons, we have way too many sides or something like that. But yeah, if I remember correctly, if you play as orcs, I don't know if he's going to talk about that or not, but the dice thing kind of changes, right? It becomes more random or something. I'm pretty sure he talked about that in one of his video.
I want to remind you all of the most important rule, the golden rule of collecting Warhammer. You will always have a better time with the army whose lore you like and design you prefer. Always buy the army you think are the coolest. If you like undead Egyptian space robots that have enslaved gods as weapons, buy the damn Necrons. I don't care if Necrons are S tier or F tier, buy the damn Necrons, okay? If you love Viking aesthetic and you love Space Marines, get the damn Space Wolves. I don't care if they're S tier or F tier, get the army that you love the lore and the design of first. Nothing sucks more than playing a meta army that some people might not even want to play you against because you're going super power gamer and having to paint and create an army that you don't like. Play the army you think is the coolest.
This is a pretty important thing, not just for Warhammer, for anything. If you're trying to get into anything, if you do something just because it's best and not something that you like, you're going to be gassed out pretty fast, right? I came across that while playing video game one time. Like, I used to like, what is the best game? I want to play this. I want to play this. Like, not realizing that I don't like the genre much, right? Like, people liked Assassin's Creed Valhalla, but Viking things doesn't really play with me. It just like, I don't know, because I was gassed out because of the whole concept. Too many Viking things throughout the years with the movies and shit. I'm just like, yeah, right, whatever. Right? So Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I didn't like it. So, I barely looked at it. I'm like, no, fuck that. I'm not going to play it. If I force myself, like, new Assassin's Creed is a really good looking game, this and that, right? I would have played it as gameplay and I would have been gassed out on Assassin's Creed, right? I would have never have looked at Assassin's Creed again the same way. So this applies to everywhere. If you don't like something, don't even try to touch it. Doesn't matter how good it is, because you won't like it. You're just forcing yourself to do something.
Golden rule. Okay, Space Marines. So the poster boys of Warhammer are our first faction today, and I know when I said that the best army to collect all the new players are like, oh god, not the Space Marines, the generic ones, and all the veteran players are going to say, oh god, not more Space Marine players I got to deal with, and the tournament players are already ready to hire a hitman to kill me. But I'm sorry, I know, I agree, Space Marines are, whew, right now, but they really are the best army. If you are a new...
There's a reason why they're generic, because they're supposed to be the main thing of this whole attraction, right? They're the attraction thing. That's why people are like, what the fuck, Space Marine? Because it's been too much, right? There's a reason behind that.
Player, Space Marines are your best bet. They are the best army to collect if you are a new player, and let me tell you. Number one, Space Marines got all the lore. They got a monopoly on lore. They easily have the most fleshed out backgrounds of any of the characters or factions in Warhammer. Space Marines have the most books. Space Marines are a huge part of the Horus Heresy. Just Space Marines will always have the most, and they have the most depth to them. Number two, Space Marines are very easy to paint, especially for new players. When you get Space Marines, you have a ton of variety of chapters, and they all have a ton variety of colors. And they're also pretty easy. Space Marines are also very large, or at least larger than normal, so their canvas size is much bigger. Smooth armor, much easier to paint, especially their vehicles. And the paint schemes are easy. Ultramarines, blue, White Scar, white, Imperial Fist, yellow, Salamanders, green. It's extremely easy to paint Space Marines, and for a new player, I would highly recommend them for that specific part, because the painting and building is a massive part of this hobby. Number three, Marines are always getting new models. They are always getting equal attention from Games Workshop. Even if they have just been updated, they will get updated again and again and again, and the Harlequins and Dark Eldar players are crying in a corner, but we don't care about them because I got a new Primaris Lieutenant and he's got a skull shield. I don't know. They're always getting new models, and while it might be a little excessive at times, they will always be updated, and your rules will always be changing, and therefore it keeps it very fresh.
It's called capitalism, money, son.
Number 4, you have a vast amount of data sheets and units at your disposal. See, in a codex, you have a part after all the lore of it, after some of the keywords and art pieces and stuff, you have the data sheet section where it goes over all of your units and what they do and their stats and everything, their special rules and so on. And when you get to that spot, however many units an army has depends on, well, how many pages of data sheets is it. Take the Adeptus Custodes. They have a very small amount of units, and their standard codex of data sheets is only 11 pages long. Sisters of Battle, however, a little more medium force, they have 19 pages of data sheets. The Imperial Guard, they have a much, much larger amount of data sheets because they're such a large army. They have 39 pages of data sheets.
Yeah, it's literally your army.
56
Astra Militarum kind of outnumbers the Astartes, doesn't it? I mean, there are way too many of them. I guess the variety would be less, and since Space Marines are so diverse and with so many different legions, there is more diversity there. I don't know, that's why they have more
pages of data sheets for different kinds of units. It's a little bloated at times because of the amount of characters and stuff, but still, they are all over the place. Their variety is endless, and it is being even more updated and added as time goes on. Which brings me to number 5, and the most important of them all. Space Marines use every phase of the game. See, in Warhammer, there are phases in each turn. We're just getting into 9th edition, so we're getting something called the command phase soon, which is fine. But then we have the movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, the charge, fight, and then morale phase. Now, the last 3 are kind of all packed into one, if I'm being perfectly honest, but the main thing is that a lot of armies might utilize some of these phases a lot more often than expected. Grey Knights are very big in the psychic phase because they're all psychers, and so they really have a lot there, while Tau don't have any psychers, and they won't even use that phase, but they've got really damn good shooting. However, they don't have any melee, so they're not going to be using the charge phase, whereas, say, Slanesh Demons will use the charge and psychic phase plenty, but they won't be doing any shooting of like any kind, pretty much. The Marines, they will use every single
Slanesh Demons won't do shooting. I think we know what things would they shoot, so I think, that's a good thing.
phase, and you can't get good at the game and get good at the phases unless you're able to use all of them. And that's where Space Marines really shine. You can play them however you want in any kind of role. See, if you are running, let's say, an Iron Hands or Imperial Fist army, these are both shooting-based armies. But you can still have good melee. Where if you wanted to play a more melee-based army like Space Wolves or Blood Angels, you'd still have good shooting units. You could still do plenty in the shooting phase. That's the most important part. Space Marines will use every single phase, and they are very, very good at it. So that is the main 5 reasons why you should be playing, or at least you should try collecting Space Marines. And I know I don't need more Space Marines in tournaments, but it is the best decision. They're good to paint.
I mean, look, the same reason people hate Space Marine, the veterans, is the reason why beginners should play that. Space Marine is hated by many people because they are all-rounder. They do everything, and it just becomes bland because there is diversity kind of becomes thinner there. They do everything. They are perfect. They're everything. It's like, man, come on. We want to play something more complex. That's what people struggle with when they becomes good enough at the game. But the reason they do everything, that's why beginners should play that, because they don't have to think about things. They do everything. So it's a good way to start.
They're good to collect. They're always getting updated. They got tons of units. They use every phase, and you can tailor them however you'd like. Plus, and this is kind of down the line, but eventually after playing them enough, you might understand which army you'd want to collect second. If you start collecting a little bit of Space Marines, you start realizing, oh wow, I really think I'd prefer having more models on the table, or I wish I had tougher models. Then you can go for Tyranids or then Adeptus Custodians. It helps you figure out your second army a lot better. If you're a new player, you want to get interested in it, just do this. Go online, get yourself either, or check eBay, because there's tons of offhand Marine stuff on eBay. Get yourself a pack of intercessors or maybe a tactical squad. I'd say intercessors because they're more modern, they're newer and more meta, and they're bigger for better paint canvases. Put them together with some glue, get some paint on them, try them out, and try getting into the game that way. I think it'd be a pretty smart and a pretty solid idea to get someone new into the hobby, and Space Marines just really are one of the better choices right now. Okay, whew. Now that I'm done sucking as much Marine dick as your brain, let's move on to the rest of the armies. And my personal favorite army at the current moment, the Imperial Guard, or the Militare, is fucking the Imperial Guard. The Imperial Guard are my main army. They are what is known as a gunline horde army. Whereas Orcs and Tyranids have a horde army that has shooting but it's more melee based, the Guard is going to be running 60 to 100 infantrymen, support walkers, artillery batteries, aircraft, drop troops, tanks, bigger tanks. The Guard is all about just blistering firepower. Now, however, the downside to this is that the Guard, while well-trained, are only 4-up well-trained. They hit on 4s, and they also do not have very good survivability. Guard stuff tends to be rather fragile. They very rarely have any special saves to keep them from taking any damage. Most of their stratagems aren't based around survivability, but in fact more firepower. Guard don't shoot amazing with their 4-up accuracy, but they make up for that with just sheer amounts of numbers of shots. I don't care if my tank hits on 4s when I've got fucking 3 of them. If the Marines are like the pristine Swiss Army knife where they can do anything and they have a little tool for every situation, Guard are like a Swiss Army knife that's about 10 times as big and attached to a big wooden stick that you just beat the shit out of people with. Your units are squishy, they don't hit great, but you've got so many of them that you just take people out by drowning them in gunfire. As for collecting the Guard, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Their models are a bit older than I'd like. I personally think that they could use a decent amount of updates. They do get updated plenty rules-wise, but since they've got so many different kinds of units and so many Forge World options, a lot of them are a bit old and are showing their age. As for collecting them in the money side, they're pretty expensive. You're going for a horde army, so you're gonna have tons of models on the playing field. That being said, I still do love them. I love their lore and their design. I love the large swaths of infantry, and I personally think they are pretty fun, if maybe not the greatest army as a main army. The Adeptus Mechanicus are the war cult of Mars. They are very weird, and I've been over how weird they are plenty before, but they are probably one of the wackiest armies in the game, maybe along with Gene Steele.
Let's be honest, they will think that we are weird, right? It goes vice versa. Yes. They just are like that. Yeah, I don't know if I wouldn't play as mechanic. It's basically they are mechanics with guns. So yeah.
The Adeptus Mechanicus have a lot of really weird back and forth styles when it comes to their gameplay. They're mainly a shooting army. I'd say they're about 75% shooting, 25% melee. However, they do have a couple dedicated melee units that can hurt pretty bad, but they're much lower on the tier list compared to the amount of gunfire they can bring. They hit pretty well. They generally hit on 3s, sometimes 4s, depending on if they're using mechs or their own current bionics. But they do definitely have some of the wackier stuff. The entire army has a 6-up invulnerability save, so occasionally you get some pretty clutch moments when you start taking damage and you roll a couple dice and you get a couple 6s and you can shrug off like full-on missiles and stuff. So that is pretty cool. Like one of their base weapons is a really regular kind of crappy carbine, but if you roll a 6 for it, it does double damage, which can actually be ludicrously powerful at times. Then you've got the weird robots, the Castellan robots, that they're these giant like World War I mech dudes that have a refractor field, so if they block off shots with their reflector invulnerable save, it'll launch back damage towards the enemy, which can be kind of crazy. They're very strange. They definitely are quite strange. Much more shooting over melee, and definitely fun, and has some great looking characters. Belisarius Call might be one of the best models in the entire game. Super cool looking too. A bitch to paint though, oh my god. And that does lead me to the collecting of the AdMech part itself. They're actually...
Basically, you can get a bit of Terminator feel with this, right? I mean, that's what they are. Mechanics with guns, but they can be a bit of Terminator style. They're, certain machineries can be fun, right? And it's based on chance, basically. It can be, they can shrug off almost any attack if the chance is there. They could do double damage if the chance is there.
getting a lot more newer updates lately. They're actually one of the newest armies as well. They came out only a couple of years ago. All their stuff is in plastic and it looks really damn good. I personally think that they have some of the best aesthetics in the entire game. The only problem is that painting them is going to be a real bitch. I would recommend trying to do some of the simpler stuff, like maybe the Dune Crawler, before you get into things like Call or a Tech Priest Dominus, because wow, is painting that going to be really damn hard. Cost-wise, they are getting a bunch of new units, which is great, but generally when you get new units, they're very expensive, and whenever new stuff comes out, it tends to be a bit expensive. The army isn't a horde, but it's also not an elite army, so they're probably in the mid-ground when it comes to price range. However, I would recommend them to people who like some kind of wacky antics and some weird abilities and weaponry, because AdMech has been getting better and better as time goes on, and they're pretty dang cool to collect. So mid-tier price, maybe a little bit more expensive, but their scopes look great and they're very new, and I would highly recommend them. Next up, you've got the Adepta Sororitas, or also known as the Sisters of Battle, my second favorite army, though I will be honest, they are really coming up to overtaking the Imperial Guard. I love my Guard, I love my Cadians, I love my Tempesta Scions, but the Sisters of Battle, they're really cool. Not only from a lore perspective, they're just insanely religious, zealotous nuns. That already is just really dang cool. As for the tabletop, they're one of the closest range armies in the entire game that isn't a full-on melee army. They're a slow-moving, like advancing gunline army with some actually horrifying melee units and just some like ridiculous close-range firepower. The Sisters are probably one of the top 3 hardest armies.
Obviously, they only come into play when there are any chaos is involved, right? I'm pretty sure that's their case. So their whole mind is really protected from any influences from warp, right? They cut off like Grey Knights are kind of opposite of that. They are supposed to be all warp, but all can also be somewhat get affected by warp. While these are complete opposite of that. They get completely shut off from the warp just because of their, I don't know, mental strength or something, and they're supposed to fight any chaos entities because they're zealots basically for Emperor's Whip or whatever. It is cool.
Play, I'd say. They've got some really weird antics as well, kind of like AdMech, maybe not quite as wacky. This army can be played in almost any way as well. You can do this a full gunline army or a full melee army, or 50-50. Everything is viable. They do require a lot of finesse and manipulation because these are all low toughness sisters that do have good armor, but when you've got a low toughness like they do, and they're not necessarily the most powerful when it comes to the actual punching, they can actually be shot off pretty quickly. So you need to be really smart on how you maneuver them, because you've got a super short range, kind of squishy army at times. That can be a little bit challenging to get through. That being said, people are sleeping on the power of Sisters. Let me be the first one to say it. You are all sleeping on how strong this army is. This army, if played well by a smart person, will crush you. As for the actual collecting of the models, Sisters are the most recent army, at least as the time of making this video, who have had a complete army overhaul. For a while, there were no plastic sister models whatsoever, but the entire army, besides I think one unit, got a full overhaul of models. Everything is brand spanking new, and they probably have the best looking models in the entire game, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay. So I guess when people like, okay, fucking spacemen, they are so generic, so like everybody thinks of Warhammer and they think of spacemen. I don't want to play as that, sure. Astra Militarum, this is your basic soldiers army, again, kind of the same. I mean, not exactly the same thing as spacemen, but kind of similar. What else should I play from Imperium? They're gonna go with this, right? Sister, battle, whatever, warrior nuns. And it can be really fun to play them when you realize that they're fanatical with their lorries. Kind of makes sense. That's why they probably revamped it, right? Made entirely new, because they realized that people really want to play this shit.
They look incredible. That crazy gothic, kind of Catholic nun look. I mean, come on, their tank is a pipe organ missile launcher. It's a pipe organ missile launcher. Sisters are one of the coolest looking armies in the entire game. They are a bit expensive though. That's the one downside, is that because
There's a reason why there's a TV show, I think, right? On Netflix, Warrior or something. Some people are like, hey, look at that. People want to do this.
entire army is brand new. It is brand new with a brand new price tag. So I personally love them. They might soon become my favorite army. I can't quite tell yet. They look great. They're a little expensive to collect. They have lots of different kinds of abilities, both melee and shooting. No psychic phase, but they do have some shenanigans to stop other people from using the psychic phase. They're pretty cool, but they are really hard to play, and they take a lot of practice. So kind of up to you. I would say not a very good starting army, but they are pretty neat. All right, Grey Knights. I heard you like the psychic phase.
Nice.
If you like the psychic phase, this is the psychic phase for you. Grey Knights are Space Marines X2. They're super mega duper elite Space Marines that are all psychers. They're nuts. Grey Knights are insane. They are very, very elite.
Grey Knights are the one that Emperor was kind of molding, right? When the heresy was happening, right? This is the last thing that Emperor kind of did, right? I'm pretty sure they're the Grey Knights. They're supposed to be the powerful of the powerful. Obviously, they're not going to be as powerful as Custodes, but still.
However, you have probably like maybe 40% fewer models than an average army will have. All of your dudes, however, are scary in their own right. They all hit very well on 3s minimum. They all have great armor. Since they're all psychers, they're really good at dealing with other psychers. They also have great shooting and very strong melee. All of your guys have extremely powerful melee weapons. The only downside of Grey Knights is that any anti-psycho shenanigans can really harm them, and you are running an elite army with very few models. When you run very few models, that means every time you're rolling and you roll those ones, it hurts that much more. Grey Knights, though, they have this awesome kind of old school knight round table aesthetic with them all carrying things like halberds and falchions. They've got holy text and they carry books around and flags. But they do get to use every phase as well. Lots of psychic, and then they're shooting and a ton of melee as well. Mainly psychic and melee. In terms of buying them, they're not too bad actually. They're probably one of the cheaper armies as well, because when you're running an elite army, not as many models on the tabletop, so it's a lot easier to fill out your entire army by only purchasing many or fewer boxes than normal. As for their scopes, I don't know exactly how new they are. I wouldn't call them very new. I call them like middle ground when it comes to how old they are. They're not super old, but they're not necessarily super new either. That being said, if they are, say, medium old or whatever, they do look great. I love the way the plastic models look. I think they look fantastic, and I would recommend trying them out if you like a psycho-heavy Space Marine thing. You play Space Marines and you're like, wow, I like the psychic phase. Grey Knights. No competition. Infantry is for losers.
Right, wait a minute. So, are you supposed to play tabletop with one of the factions? Is that how it is? Right? If somebody has Necrons and you come up with, Grey Knights, you're supposed to play Necrons versus Grey Knights? How is the lore accurate? Grey Knights are not going to fight by themselves, right? They're supposed to be with the Space Marines or something. Like every 1,000 Space Marines, there's going to be one Grey Knight or something like that, right? So there's not going to be a place where Grey Knights single-handedly fight someone, right? They're going to be as a support thing. So aren't you supposed to play Space Marine with Grey Knights, or there is no restriction? You can play as Grey Knights, or you can play as Space Marine with Grey Knights, or any combination. Is that how it is? I don't know. Yeah. Well, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to do second part tomorrow, I guess. We are already reaching 30-minute mark, and it's a half video. I'll do it in 2 parts. But yeah, so far this is really fun. I like, like he said, I like the sisters, nun thing. But even so, I don't care how much hated they are. Space Marines do feel fun. Like, you don't have to pick the best of the best Space Marines, right? You have to pick specific Space Marines, right? It would be really fun. I don't know, like Templars, Black Templars, something. Those, Iron. What was that? I forgot the name. But yeah. If you play a specific niche of something, because of their lore, it would be really fun. I don't know. Yeah. Alright, well, if you like my next one, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.